Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilov, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. I believe that our personal power is closely related to our strength and our fitness, but I do want to emphasize that fitness is not a size or a number. Fitness isn't about how we look, it's about how we feel and being able to do everything that we want to do and love to do with strength, grace, and confidence. But something really magical happens that when we do feel better and we move better, we look better. And an incredible cycle, a positive cycle is started and continues to grow as long as we nurture it and take care of it. And I wanted to share one of the many movement modalities that have really helped me, as well as hundreds of my clients over the years, and that is Pilates. And unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of Pilates, but years ago, nobody heard of it. Nobody knew what it was until it finally burst onto the fitness scene. It was probably around 1998, maybe as late as 2000, but I think it was a little bit earlier than that. And it burst into the scene as a new form of exercise that can transform your body. Well, half of that statement is true. It can transform your body, but it's not a new form of exercise. It has actually been around for a very, very long time, but up until that point, it was the best kept secret among dancers as well as performing artists. And I began studying Pilates in 1983, but even back then, nobody knew what it was, and very few people had ever even heard of it. There were just a few Pilates studios across the United States, mostly in New York and LA, of course. And at the time I began taking Pilates, there were only two in Denver. There was one that had been there for a few years, and then a friend of mine that I took ballet class with actually opened up a Pilates studio right across the street from the ballet studio, and he started with just one little reformer, and we had no idea what he was talking about, but our ballet master was very, very pro Pilates, and he actually had studied with Joe Pilates when he was dancing so many years ago with ABT, the American Ballet Theater, because Joseph Pilates was right there in Manhattan, right across the street. And the only reason why I began taking Pilates classes was because Mr. Boyette, my ballet master, highly recommended it and wanted all of his dancers to do Pilates. And when Mr. Boyette told us to do something, we all did it for several reasons. Number one, we were all terrified of him. And number two, he always seemed to have our best interests at heart, even though he really did have a strange way of communicating that to us at times. But what I really wanted to emphasize today is what Pilates is about, why it works, and how you can use the principles of Pilates even if you never walk into a Pilates studio or take a Pilates class. Please don't tell any Pilates instructors that I said that. Shh, it's our little secret. But there are 6 basic principles of Pilates that can really help you in every single physical activity that you do, every single exercise, every single strengthening movement, everything. It can help you prevent injuries. It can help you recover from injuries. Pilates can even help you prevent illness and disease. And I know that sounds really far-fetched, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But in the meantime, let me just identify briefly how and why Pilates works. In traditional exercises, typically our big, powerful muscles get bigger and more powerful as we are strengthening. And that sounds like a good thing, right? And it is. But unfortunately, we have other muscles that are smaller, what we call the intrinsic muscles, that are a lot deeper. And we don't see them, so oftentimes it's one of those things that out of sight, out of mind. And why would you even think about them or want to strengthen them? because we're so focused and we're so preoccupied with the outer muscles, because those are the ones that we see and those are the ones that we think are giving us that sleek, toned look. But those little intrinsic muscles really have a very important function, and they function kind of like as helper muscles for the bigger ones, and they help balance out our structure. So more like the skeletal structure, our deeper muscles, and those are the ones that actually partner with the bigger ones. But if we don't strengthen those intrinsic muscles, what happens is that we get a muscle imbalance, a muscular imbalance, where those muscles, again, the bigger ones keep getting bigger and bigger, and the small intrinsic ones keep getting weaker and weaker. And that's when injury is just kind of has the opportunity to come knocking on the door and knocking us over. So what we do in Pilates is we do focus on those intrinsic muscles, and that helps rebalance our muscular system as well as rebalance our skeletal system as well, so we can move with strength and grace. And let's go from there to the 6 basic principles, because as I said before, even if you never take a Pilates class, you actually can get the benefit out of every single thing that you do if you focus on those 6 basic principles. And I encourage you to focus on each individual. I'm going to list them for you, but I want you to focus on each one at a time, because they are, of course, very closely related, but I want you to focus on each one, and then once you feel comfortable with it, and once you feel like you can incorporate it or integrate it into any of your physical activities, then move on to the next one. So by moving this way and by moving slowly and really focusing on each one and then integrating them together, eventually they will be so deeply integrated into your body and into your brain that they will become second nature, and you can apply them to every single thing that you do. So it's kind of like an automatic, or what we would say autonomic, response deep in your nervous system. And I do want to reiterate, or to make the point, that Pilates really wasn't developed simply to make you look better. It was to prevent and recover from injuries, to rebalance the musculature, to improve your posture, to improve core strength, to give you a strong foundation from which to function, to give you a healthy body, one that is strong, flexible, and resilient to injury and illness. So I can get into that a little bit more deeply later, because I think it's really fascinating. It relates to how and why Joseph Pilates developed the method in the first place. But let's get to the really good stuff, and something that you can use starting today. And the first principle of Pilates is concentration, and that is just simply paying attention to yourself, to your physical movements and the sensations that you experience as you do them. So you get the maximum benefit out of each and every exercise or movement pattern that you're engaging in, regardless of whether or not it is Pilates or lifting weights or even just simply putting your groceries away. And this is related to something that I do talk about an awful lot, which is awareness, your self-awareness, awareness of your not only the external environment, but your internal environment as well, because the more you're able to pay attention to your internal environment, the more alert you'll be if something is a little bit amiss, so you can actually address it before it gets out of control. For example, when I had my back injury, if I had that internal sense or that internal ability to listen to the signals that my body was telling me, then I don't think my injury would have gotten that far out of control. But of course, I was so focused on other things. I was getting ready to get into physical therapy school. I was taking a lot of prerequisites. I was in school part-time. I was working part-time. And I was so distracted by other things that I just didn't have that self-awareness or that ability to pay attention to myself. And boy, does that sound familiar. I mean, how many of us do that? We go through life, we're so busy, we're so distracted. There are so many things that we have to take care of. And of course, we're usually at the bottom of the list of who to take care of. So even through your exercise and the things that you're going to be doing anyway, if you can start working with this concentration, this level of concentration into your physical movements, your physical self, and the internal sensations that you're aware of as you're going through your movement patterns, that's going to just give you so much more bang for your buck when you're working out, no matter what it is that you're doing. And the next basic principle is control, that every movement that you do should be done with absolute control, so that anytime you're doing one of the movement exercises, one of the movement patterns, that you should be in so much control that you can go as slow as possible and still be able to get it done. And what this does, it actually fires up a lot more muscle fibers, resulting in more strength and power. And both the concentration and control and the benefits of it and how to do it is something that I address in episode 16, The Magic of Healing Through Movement. And in that episode, I talk about another movement modality that is certainly magical, and that is Feldenkrais. So there are some similarities between Pilates and Feldenkrais to a certain degree, and certainly with martial arts as well. And I'll bet it is the same with a lot of other movement arts, such as yoga, but I don't really know much about yoga. I did take a couple of classes, but it wasn't something that did resonate with me. So they're just basic principles that you can live by and employ into every single thing that you do to help you get the maximum benefit out of every movement pattern, every exercise, every activity that you do, and most importantly, to not injure yourself along the way and to be able to prevent injuries. So the next one is centering, and it's probably one of my favorite because it does relate to core strength. But when people think about core strength, I mean, what do you think of? Most of the time, people think of that superficial muscles, the washboard abs look, that six-pack, everybody wants that, or maybe the flat stomach. But especially with the six-pack and the washboard abs, that's really the more superficial muscles. And those are the muscles, the rectus abdominis, where the fibers go up and down, so from your pubic bone to the bottom of your rib cage. And when those fibers contract, they bend your spine forward, and that's what it's meant to do. And it's a wonderful muscle, as I said, for bending your spine forward or for pushing things out of your body, but it really isn't very effective in giving you the support of your spine and your pelvis that you want for a healthy body, or that nice flat look that a lot of us are looking for too, that's more aesthetic. But that flat belly actually does support your spine and your pelvis too. So instead of looking at those superficial muscles, I mean, you can do crunches and sit-ups or whatever until the cows come home, and maybe you already have. And how did that work out for you? Did you get the results that you wanted? Or did you strain your back? Did you strain your neck? And there's a reason for that, because doing those crunches is actually kind of truncating your body. It's shortening your body. And as you're going up and you're bending your spine forward, you're working those more superficial muscles, but you're also kind of building a muscle that extends out and protrudes out instead of comes back in. That's also putting a lot more pressure on your spine, on your vertebral discs, and it's even putting pressure on your internal organs, and it's contracting you. It's actually shortening you. What you really want to do is to have strength with length. So with centering, we're targeting a spot, a point deep in our abdomen, and it's the area between our pubic bone and our belly button, and about halfway in between. And it's called, in Chinese medicine, it's the dantian. You might hear that. Or in Japanese, it's called the hara. But this is the area that you really want to concentrate on for centering. And to find that area, you can sit on the edge of a firm chair with your sit bones right on the very edge. Sit in a neutral position of your spine and just place your hand low on your belly, and just with an exhale, try and pull your belly, that area, that dantian, into your spine and up toward your head. And nothing else stresses or strains. It's actually a very gentle movement. What you're doing is you're really isolating that area. And that's also right around a muscle. It is a deeper muscle than the other ones that I was talking about earlier. But this muscle is called the pyramidalis, and it is the shape of a pyramid. If you looked at it, it goes from your pubic bone to your umbilicus, your belly button, is what I'm talking about. And when you can find that muscle and you can contract it, it gives you a nice lift of your lower abdominal area. It supports your spine, your pelvis, your internal organs, and that's actually where your centering begins. And we can continue to work on our centering to isolate an abdominal muscle called the transverse abdominis. So with your rectus abdominis, where the fibers go up and down, our transverse abdominis, the fibers go side to side. So when we contract our transverse abdominis, that actually lengthens our spine, frees up our hips, gives that incredible support to our spine and our pelvis, to support them, to prevent back injuries, prevent back pain, and actually to recover from back pain or back injuries if you've had one of those. And if you have, I'm so sorry, because I know how horrible they can be. But you can recover from it. You can recover from anything. And Pilates, when it's taught right, if you go to the right practitioner, can really help you with that. And the other thing about centering, another thing that it does when you focus on this area and you really learn how to lengthen and lift that area, you get taller. Not only do you get taller, you get slimmer. You get a flatter belly, a smaller waistline, and it's almost what they call in Pilates the girdle of strength. So you're building an internal, muscular internal girdle for yourself to give you that corset of strength that's also flexible that can support you. But again, if you're doing crunches and sit-ups, what you're doing is you're compressing and shortening your spine, and you're rounding it, and you're risking injury not only to your back but your neck. And if you can lengthen, and you can practice doing this even lying down, to find that area, the centering, and it's absolutely beautiful and wonderful. And when you feel that, you just feel pretty darn sassy, and your clothes fit better too. So that's a added plus. The next principle is flowing movement, that one movement flows into the next one, that no movement stops in the middle of it. You don't have any harsh or ballistic type of movement pattern. Everything goes nice and slowly and smoothly from one transition into the next, almost as if you were watching a well-trained dancer or an experienced dancer or martial artist. You never see them stop and start. It's always a continuous flow of movement. Again, that really fires up the nervous system, the muscle fibers, and the neurons that are responsible for innervating them, but it really gives you that control. The control. So now you can see how all of these principles are feeding on each other, and they kind of fit together like pieces of a puzzle, so it's really pretty cool. And when you work this way, it also makes an incredible imprint of what you're doing and the patterns that you're developing as you're moving. The next principle is precision of movement. And again, this is goes back to the control, but it's the attention that you give to each movement. It's the detail. The devil is in the detail, and you're really paying attention to every single movement with the utmost attention, because every aspect of the movement is of the utmost importance. From the position of your head and your neck to the position of your pelvis, the relationship of your head to your pelvis, and how it moves together or how it stabilizes, and even the shape and the position of your fingers and your toes. Even what you do with your eyes, it all comes together, and it all fits together again like that wonderful biomechanical puzzle that you're creating to develop that strong, healthy body, that Pilates body. And I just want to remind you that these are things that you can do on your own in every single physical activity that you do, and that just continues to reinforce the patterns that you're developing with Pilates and keeping you strong and healthy. And the final principle of Pilates is one that I have a real love-hate relationship with. It is breathing. I have no personal issues with breathing. I highly recommend it myself. But as a former respiratory therapist, it would always make me scratch my head when I would listen to some of the Pilates instructors teaching the right way to breathe. And over the course of my careers and my different teachings in Pilates, Feldenkrais, martial arts, etc., I often had clients or students ask me, what is the right way to breathe? And I would just kind of think about it for a minute, and I would look at them, and with all seriousness, I would say, well, in and out is a really good place to start. And they would just look at me like I was out of my mind. But the truth is, there is no right or wrong way to breathe. I mean, we breathe the way we do. It's a natural physiologic function, and we really don't have to manipulate it with active thought, with active cognition, because there's a place deep in our brainstem that is actually sensing our blood levels of carbon dioxide dioxide and oxygen, and letting our brain know when to breathe deeper, when to, slow it down, and how to breathe. It responds very quickly to our flight or fight. You start, the breathing will change. And again, our physiology is just absolutely fascinating. But even having said that, it's amazing how many times we hold our breath. So think about it. Start paying attention and notice how many times during the day that you hold your breath over maybe even some really silly things. And even I noticed one time that why am I holding my breath every time I unload the dishwasher? It was just a really silly habit or a pattern that I developed out of I don't know where and I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I don't like unloading the dishwasher. But in my own personal opinion and what I've experienced from working with clients and students and even in my own work is that, when you hold your breath, everything is a lot more difficult. Everything strains. So I always encourage people to exhale with the effort. So anytime you're exerting any effort, that is when you exhale, because the inhale will come nice and naturally. One of the first people that I took Pilates from was very adamant about the breathing, and he was promoting this forced exhalation and this forced breathing, and it was just so unnatural. And not only that, a forced exhalation when you don't need it is really not good for you physiologically, especially if you have even a little bit of asthma or a tendency to airways collapse, because what happens when you force an exhale is it actually can collapse those airways. Now, I'm not talking about a total lung collapse, but I'm talking about the small airways, deep in your lungs, and it's just way too much effort. And it's also putting way too much strain and stress and work on the intercostal muscles, the muscles between your ribs. And I think that maybe that might have been the theory behind it, is that it would strengthen your chest. I don't know. And I don't know if that's something that Joseph Pilates himself did teach. I don't know, because I wasn't around back then and I never studied with him. But I do know that as a child, Joseph Pilates did have asthma, and so that was an important part of his own personal discovery and his own personal rehabilitation, was to be able to teach himself or reteach himself how to breathe. So he did incorporate that as one of the core principles. But I think some people take it to the extremes. When I took from, it wasn't the first Pilates instructor I ever had, he was the second one, and he was so huge on the breathing. And of course, I would be on the reformer doing the exercises, and I would be doing like a nice, even, flowing breath. And he would stand at the foot of the reformer and he would yell, "Breathe, breathe, I want to hear you breathe." And then he would start breathing, and I would kind of just look at him with a blank look, and I would just go, making like a sound like the wind in the trees, just "No, louder, louder, I want to hear you breathing." And I just kept on doing my thing and let him do his until he almost passed out because he was hyperventilating so badly. And I like to think that I made my point, because breathing shouldn't be ballistic. It shouldn't be forced. It shouldn't be effortful unless you are having an asthma attack, or unless you're climbing a 14er or hiking at a very high altitude, or maybe running a marathon or doing something that is very aerobic or cardio. So my recommendation is just doing that nice, smooth, easy flowing breath, flowing breathing. I prefer exhaling with the effort. I'm not going to tell you how to breathe. A lot of people ask, again, like I said, hey, what's the right way of breathing? And I remember one time when I was in a martial arts seminar, and oh my goodness, it was at the end of the seminar. I was so exhausted. We had been there all day, and my sensei's sensei was actually from out of town, and he was teaching us the seminar, and he has a tendency to be long-winded anyway. And we were sitting in seiza, which that's kneeling on the floor with your feet tucked underneath you, so your butt is sitting on your heels. And after you've been doing that for about 30 minutes, let me tell you something, your legs are screaming and you're begging for relief. And finally, when I thought he was completely finished with lecturing us and all the questions, he asked one more time, he said, "So, are there any more questions?" And one of my classmates, one of the other martial artists, looked at him with stars in his eyes. He was just so excited to be at the feet of the master. And he said, "Yes, what is the right way to breathe?" And I even groaned out loud. I almost keeled over, because we were on the mat for another 15 minutes as Sensei went into the right and wrong way to breathe. And again, that former respiratory therapist that lives in my head was just going absolutely bonkers. And I just wanted to scream, "Just breathe. Don't stop breathing and you'll be fine." So that's pretty much all I want to say about breathing, except that I probably could do an entire podcast on that one topic, because I absolutely love the pulmonary system. I love the cardiopulmonary system almost as much, maybe as much as I love the nervous system. So neurology, cardiopulmonary, our bodies are just so amazing. Every single day, I just am more and more amazed. The more that I learn, the more I want to learn, because it is a never-ending process. So my final comments on breathing is just don't stop doing it. It's a very good thing. So if you do choose to try Pilates classes, there are two different ways you can do Pilates. There are mat exercises and there are exercises on the apparatus, on the equipment. The most popular and well-known piece of equipment is the universal reformer, which a lot of people think looks like a torture device, and it does look a little odd at first if you're not used to it. But let me tell you, getting on a reformer is just like being in heaven. It feels so good. And as a beginner, you typically do start lying down on the reformer, which is what I would hope you would start at if you did try a class. And what the reformer does, it's a sliding horizontal platform, and it provides a supportive environment. So it gives you a little bit of support. So even if you do have any injuries or any other problems, Pilates can be done in a very safe way. Again, as long as you have somebody who knows what they're doing. And even pregnant women or people who are in casts are able to use the reformer. You just have to do a little bit of modification. And I have used Pilates rehab in my practice. That's actually how I started my practice back in 1999, was as a Pilates-based rehabilitation center, and then, progressing people to conditioning as well. And it's just fascinating, a wonderful way of recovering from injuries, preventing injuries, and it's just fun too. Sometimes it feels like you're in a little jungle gym. There are also mat exercises that you can do. And basically Joseph Pilates created or developed 40 original mat exercises. And these exercises are really simple, but they're very difficult to do well. I really caution people, if they have any kind of injuries or back pain or neck pain, anything like that, or if they're out of shape or they're trying to get into a conditioning program for the very first time, do not start with the mat exercises, because the reformer will give you a lot more support. So do not start with the mat exercises, and please do not try and learn Pilates from a book. There are some really great books out there that you can reference, but you can't learn something like Pilates from a book or from a video or even in a large group. You really need the one-on-one attention and the guidance to make sure that you're doing the exercises correctly. But the thing I love about the mat exercises is they're portable. You can do them anywhere. You don't need any equipment, and you can get one heck of a really good workout just by doing the mat exercises. And even Joseph Pilates used to say that if you're incorporating all 6 principles of the Pilates method when you're doing the mat exercises, you only need to do 3 to 5 repetitions of each exercise. And he was absolutely right. I know this to be true because I started studying Pilates for myself in 1983 for about 5 years using the reformer. And shortly after my husband and I got married, he got a job offer in Arkansas, and for some reason he took it. So I lived in Arkansas, central Arkansas. It's a beautiful state. I was there for 19 months, 1 day and 15 hours. And I was so excited that when I got to Arkansas, we were outside of Little Rock, and I was just so excited that they had ballet that I knew that they didn't have Pilates there, and I was right, they didn't. So every single day, I would do a mat workout by myself at home, going through as many of the exercises as I could. After all, I had a whole lot of time on my hands because I really didn't have a whole lot of other stuff to do there in Arkansas. So that was my entertainment. And for probably 5 days a week, I would get down on the floor and I would do my exercises for about 30 to 45 minutes. And it was wonderful. I felt fantastic. And at least I was getting my Pilates fix, and my body felt nice and strong. strong and limber and flexible. And I was able to, take ballet class 3 days a week. And I did have the opportunity to dance one season with Ballet Arkansas when I was 31. So that's my claim to fame. That's my claim that I was a professional ballerina at one point. But anyway, it was when I stopped doing the exercises. When we moved back to Denver, and that's when I decided I was going to try and get into physical therapy school. And I was working full-time, finally had to go down to part-time, and taking classes, prerequisites part-time, and juggling everything and sitting and studying, and something in my schedule had to give. So I still wanted to take ballet classes, but that kind of fell by the wayside too, and I completely stopped doing my Pilates exercises. And I really believe that that is why I hurt my back. If I had continued with the Pilates mat exercises the way I had been doing when I was living in Arkansas, I really think that I never would have had that back injury and have gone through that 2.5 years of being a chronic pain patient. But on the other hand, it turned out pretty well because it made me the person that I am today. So over the years, I have done a tremendous amount of research in Pilates and developed a couple of programs where I would go out to different physical therapy clinics to promote Pilates and educate them about it and how it really could help their practice and help their patients. And the funny thing is, even when I was a physical therapy student, I would talk to all of my instructors, my clinical instructors, my professors, my classmates, other physical therapists, anybody who would listen to me. And I would sing the praises of Pilates and how wonderful it was and what it could do for people. And I got the exact same answer every single time was, oh, well, Pilates is nice for dancers, but it's really not good for anybody else. Oh, really? I remember being in a clinical rotation when I was a student, and there was one patient there my classmate was working with, and he was a bilateral above-the-knee amputee. He was only 50, and he couldn't go home because he couldn't transfer himself from a wheelchair to the bed to the bathroom. So he was going to spend the rest of his life in a nursing home because he couldn't transfer himself. So my classmate, who was really, really smart, a lot smarter than me, worked with him very diligently for months and couldn't get him to transfer himself. So out of desperation, she asked me for help, which, I thought that was very nice of her, thinking I was going to be able to do something. And I thought, oh, if she couldn't do it, what does she expect me to do? So the first thing that I did was watch him try and transfer himself. And it was so obvious. Every time he pushed down with his arms, instead of the force going through his arms and helping to lift his body up off of the mat, he was losing it because he had no stability in his shoulder blades, in his shoulder girdle. It was so obvious. I couldn't believe that nobody else didn't see this with all the people that had been working with him. I picked one of the mat exercises and I modified it in a way that even Joseph Pilates wouldn't have recognized it himself, but it was an exercise that was fabulous for scapular stability. In just a few days, he was able to lift himself off the mat. In a week, he was able to transfer himself with just minimal help from one person. And then in 2 weeks, he was able to transfer himself pretty much independently, just with a little bit of supervision. And everybody thought I was a genius. And no, it wasn't me. I'm not the genius. The true genius was Joseph Pilates and the method that he created. And what's even funnier, as I said, everybody in PT school, all of the therapists, instructors, professors, everybody just completely poo-pooed Pilates, that it was only for dancers. And then, of course, I was able to use that one mat exercise and help that man get discharged from the nursing home, which I thought was a pretty cool thing to do. But after that, probably about 2 or 3 years later, Pilates broke into the rehab community, and then all of a sudden the rehab community, the physical therapists, acted like they invented Pilates themselves. So it was like one of those things. And there are a lot of different versions or different styles of Pilates out there, and everybody claims to be the closest style or the one that is most like exactly what Joseph Pilates did himself. And that seems to be a great big claim to fame. And there was quite a bit of kerfuffle about that quite a few years ago about really who owned even the name of Pilates. But the truth is, Pilates has evolved quite a bit since the time of Joseph Pilates. And, would he have approved of the changes? I don't know. What I do know is that he left us with an incredible gift. And I do know that he was right when he used to tell people that years after he was gone, they would say he was right all along. So thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay flexible, and find your own core principles to live by, because that is the way of the FemiNinja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.